So thank you very much for the invitation. I do really mean that. I actually really love what I do, and it's nice to be able to share that with other people who are about feeling good and doing good, because that's the key to life. So just before I kick into this formal part, a little bit about the Trust. So this presentation is kind of starting from the first Maori canoe arriving until today. So it doesn't talk a great deal about the Trust. So the Trust is a charitable trust. It is a 100% charitable trust. It is not like Destiny Church at all. And
or sanitarium.
Or sanitarium. And so one of the challenges that I have is to generate enough income to pay all the bills and arrive at a figure of zero. And for those of you in the commercial world, it's not that hard to sort of say to your shareholders, look, you know, the profit's down 5% or the dividends, you know, down a certain percentage. But for me, if I don't achieve my target, we make a loss, and that's not a sustainable model. So the financial part of it is quite tricky. As you'll see, the buildings have a high maintenance component. Capacity is a nominal 250. We usually max out at about 230. That's a lot of water, that's a lot of effluent, it's a lot of food, it's a lot of everything. And we are a little bit like a village. We capture and treat our own water, we process and discharge it not into the sea, our own wastewater, and all of the electricity for the island is generated on site. So when you think of a little town, they have a mayor and councillors, and it's myself, a wonderful and very, very good operations manager, Kim Matheson, and an equally fantastic maintenance person, Ken Simpson. And then at the moment we have 3 full-time instructors, and we've actually taken the unusual step of taking on some interns, because the training for outdoor instructors in New Zealand has been neglected for years, and I am absolutely over people on working holiday visas. They are not bad people, but they're here for a good time, not a long time. And the cultural work ethic differences between most of them and what I consider to be Kiwi values are substantially different. So charitable trust, and we'll take it all from there. Right, so I make this very, very clear. This is just a light-hearted, unofficial, it's intended to inform and hopefully entertain slightly. That's an image of the camp taken from the sky, and it's an old military facility, which we'll see more about later. Very, very good example of adaptive reuse. The island that we are on is Motutapu, Te Motutapu Ai Taikihu, and it has an area of 1,510 hectares. So it is massively bigger than Turi Martini, I think close to 5 times the size in area. And there's been a planting program conducted by the Motutapu Restoration Trust, which has seen, it varies, but let's say 1 million plants planted out. And because of the desire to keep species local, almost every single one of those has been a seed on the island, germinated, propagated, reared and planted out. So this isn't just a trip down to Palmer's. I make no claims as to my knowledge. I'm not a historian. This is intended to be stuff that's freely available off the internet and a few other sources. I certainly do not mean to offend anyone or take any step on your toes. So somewhere around about 1300-1400, Arawa canoe arrives on Motutapu, and they found it to be a very beautiful place. To protect it, they left 2 guardian lizards, one at Islington Bay and one at Home Bay. I'm reliably informed they were not taniwha, they were guardian lizards. Ironically, there was some conflict quite early on where the 2 chiefs had a bit of a disagreement because one of the chiefs was socialising with the other chief's daughter. And this may not be perfectly correct, but one of the names for Rangitoto relates to the fact that he hit him and his nose bled. So, so from that moment on, basically people came and went, they harvested, there was forest, it was fully forested, so the archaeological records suggest they ate a great deal of seafood and forest birds. The taumata on one of the canoes was what the island was named after. Okay, around about about 1400, Rangitoto erupted. There's varying reports on how that happened. I think the common consensus is that it wasn't a one-off catastrophic eruption. There was multiple eruptions probably over several hundred years. But what we do know is the prevailing southwest wind was in play, and it fully deforested Motutapu, and that the layer of ash very clearly indicates that it was blown by a southwesterly wind, so there's heavier covers of ash in one area than there is in others. Motutapu, as a result of this, is extremely fertile. The Maori occupation probably got a bit of a pause there. We do know that there was humans and a dog on the island during one of the eruptions, and it's a pretty famous archaeological site called the Sunday site, S-U-N-D-E, and that was the name of the archaeologist that found it, and it was adult, child and dog footprints that were preserved by the ash falling on them, and it's near West Point. Okay, things settled down a little bit, and some occupations started happening. Bars were built around about 1600, and what tended to happen around that period was multiple iwi used the island for multiple purposes. So some would come fishing, some would come hunting, some were propagating crops, but it was, from what I understand, it was quite a harmonious thing. There was no particularly dominant iwi on the island. And that was the case for many islands. The Four Knights is another example where multiple iwi used the island for different purposes. Jumping quite a long way ahead here, in the early 1800s, because of trade, Maori started to become armed. The musket was a very sought after trading commodity, and they realised that gave them power over everyone, including other iwi, and Ngāpui went on the rampage, and it caused a great deal of harm to other iwi. Slightly generalising that, Tamaki Makaurau was a place of transition, so you had large forces to the north, large forces to the south, and depending on who had the upper hand, the southern ones would push north or the northern ones would push down. And that is one of the reasons that treaty settlements in Auckland are so incredibly complicated, because depending on what day a certain iwi was dominant or not dominant in any given area, hence the Tamaki collective of 13 iwi. It sounds like because of the warring, pretty much no one lived there between 1826 and 1828, and then the first iwi to properly resettle the island was Ngātaiki Tamaki. They have a marae Mapuia out near Clevedon. Right, in 1840, which was 12 years after those two previous dates, the northern part of the island was sold to a Mr. William Brown, and it was one of the earlier transactions, property and land transactions in Auckland. There are multiple examples of the transactions, and I have not gone to the trouble of looking up the various names of the people who sold it, but quite clearly there were some European names in there that repeat in history. The southern part of the island was purchased by a couple of guys called Williamson and Crummer, and sometime but after that, for the princely sum of £15, Rangitoto was purchased.
Oh, yes, many.
54 years. Okay, so Robert Graham was awarded the northern part of the island and acquired title to the southern part. I've used the word acquired because no one can quite figure out how he did that. But the long and the short of it was that the northern part of the island had been sold to two different people, kind of at the same time. And that was one of the newspaper articles from the 11th of August in 1857, announcing that there was confusion about who had bought what. I guess this is sort of now heading into a more stable time. So in 1869, the Reed family purchased Motutapu. Little bit about the Reed family. So he was considerably, like 30 years older than Eliza, Henry. And they went there, built a homestead. It was very fashionable those days to have a menagerie, a little bit like Governor Gray did at Kowau. So they brought over buffalo, wallaby, emus, all manner of animals, had 3 children, and then Henry up and died. In 1870, I do consider this quite significant, the bay, show this. That is where the Motutapu camp is located. So it was declared a public landing reserve, and you know, it's a nice sheltered little bay. It's got a reef running out, so it's sheltered from just about everything bar a northerly. This was what they did in those days. You bought an island and you built a homestead and you released a whole lot of animals and you had parties. And as I read, is that for some of those parties, 13,000 people attended. That is a lot of people, and that's old steamers, picnics and so forth. Yeah, and so that's how they got there. Those piles, the piles under that walkway, still exist to this day. Made out of hardwood. Busy little spot. What we can see in the foreground there is those are the stock pens. The stock will be loaded onto barges or scows. I'll let you read this because if I say it, it's probably quite rude. This was a newspaper article following one of the picnics.
Very hard to read.
Different language used in those days. Right, the Reed family, James and Eliza at least, are buried on the island, and in someone's wisdom, the very small area, and it is like that end of this room, has actually got its own title, and it continues to be owned by the Reed family to this day. However, they have expressed no sort of claim over it. I am not a religious or a spiritual man, but it is a beautiful place. You can see why they chose it to be buried. The serenity up there is pretty amazing. It looks right over the homestead. Right, and then in 1936, the island was compulsory acquired for defence purposes. It's widely reported they had something to do with World War II, but for those of you who know the dates, World War II wasn't even thought of in 1936. What actually happened was there was a perceived Russian threat. The Russians were going to come storming down through the Pacific. The Americans, again, this is all from bits and pieces I picked up along the way. The Americans even then didn't like the Russians, and so they actually came to New Zealand and wrote what they put on the top of the document to New Zealand was it was a defence plan, but it was actually an invasion plan. And if you think about the two things there, they're actually the same document, just depends on which side of the fence you want to sit on. Because the Americans felt New Zealand was utterly and totally capable of defending itself, and that should the Russians get near, they were actually going to come in and take over. But the plan and the design was from that process, and things actually started to happen in 1936. And as we talk about archaeological sites, but later they, whatever scrub and bush that was left, they just got rid of it. It was all just smashed down. And that is why they chose Motutapu, because I've called it the focal point of the Gulf. So from there, the guns that were installed on Motutapu, that's where they could fire to, so they could fully lock off and protect the harbour. These are just a few sort of historic pictures, which I can't see because of the reflection. You can see the reef out off the bay there, so that's why it was quite protected. Significant investment, and these gun emplacements are there to this day in comparatively good condition. No small feat of construction, and particularly when you think of the technology and the equipment they had back in those days. How am I going for time?
No, that's fine. You're fine.
So there is a slightly funny story about how the guns came to be, and it had implications further on. Believe it or not, there was never a shortage of ammunition for British guns, but there was a shortage of ammunition for other guns, including American Zealand was in the market for some guns, but a lot of other people were as well. We couldn't really find any. And by sheer chance, the Brazilians had ordered guns from the British and then reneged on a payment. So they went to open market and New Zealand managed to get them, and that is the only reason those guns came to New Zealand, came to Motutapu. That was an aerial shot. Okay, so you're starting to see the development now. You can see the camp in the upper left side and a network of roads and so forth, and then the 3 gun emplacements sitting up on top of the hill. That's an old grainy photo of the camp itself. It's a bit nice in that, but it hasn't really changed. Yeah, and there was so much work done. It was, incredible. So, yeah, population went from 10 to 200, and then depending on what they had happening at the time, up to 1,000 people stationed on the island. The camp itself was designed for 200. I don't think I've taken the slide out. There's actually a photo of them, just like teepee-style tents, just hundreds of them. Yep, so the process of variation of the dates, some of it's a little bit grey. I don't think there was a fully sort of confirmed date that the military withdrew, but certainly by 1950 their presence was becoming quite minimal. And that was all about 3 6-inch guns that could fire 23 kilometres. They were aimed as you aim a machine gun. So yes, they did have rudimentary radar and stuff, and they would calculate out a trajectory, but basically they started firing and then watched where the projectiles landed and adjusted it accordingly. 3 guns, each one could fire 4 rounds in the time that it took the first round to reach the target at maximum range. So 12 of these things in the air at any one time. And the projectiles, you can barely lift them. They're about that long, 6 inches. Yeah, and so there was a lot of steel-lead and explosive flying around. They built a whole bunch of magazines. We now call them bunkers. And I have had the pleasure of meeting the commanding officer, and his story goes that they didn't really need them, but if they didn't find something to do, they would get sent to the Russian front. So they urgently required more ammunition storage. They kept them away from real war. And this is part of it. There was quite a high number of female soldiers on the island, and I've heard a few stories about some of the fun and games that was had in that area. Right, by 1967 the military had really left, and someone decided to scrap the guns, and they were cut up and removed, and sadly to do that they actually smashed a big hole in the gun emplacements, which has allowed some corrosion stuff to set into the reinforcing. And that was it. She sort of became the forgotten island sort of after about 1950, 55. Wasn't a heck of a lot of good farming done. Just kind of abandoned. Heck of a lot of archaeological sites, and if you sort of flash back to the photos of the bulldozers, I can't even put a fence post in today without getting Heritage New Zealand approval. But Caterpillar bulldozers with blades and great big crushing rollers and slashers and goodness knows what else pretty much scoured the entire island for a couple of years. Right, in 1967, somebody decided it would make a great outdoor education camp, and the correct term, or the official term, is adaptive reuse. That is a watershed moment, because if someone hadn't done something, it simply would have fallen down. Wasn't really much management. They just had sort of short-term leases. Different groups would use it maybe for their summer camp. So there was no long-term view whatsoever in relation to preserving or improving the facility. Most of these groups have religious foundation. That's my little joke. So the YMCA was one of the short-term leaseholders, and the story I have heard is that they charged fees for Motutapu and reinvested nothing in Motutapu, and that actually funded the YMCA North Shore, or at least partially funded it. David Longy. The story goes that his son came back from a camp on Motutapu and was raving about what a cool time he'd had, and at about the same time a demolition order came across the Prime Minister's desk, and it just said that this is a worthless fire hazard and derelict and blah blah blah, and it should just be knocked down because of the magnitude of that. It needed his approval, and he said something isn't adding up here, and he asked it to be looked into, and he said it shall not be demolished. That particular photo is the nuclear-free legislation. It's got nothing to do with Motutapu whatsoever. Okay, so that's great. We've saved it, but it's still pretty run down. Enter the Motutapu Outdoor Education Trust. And so the founding trustees, they knew something of the camp through their children going there, and fortunately they were a bunch of very fine people. Happened to be men, but that's insignificant. They went to the Department of Conservation, said, you can't save this, can you? The Department of Conservation was quite new. Said, no, we can't. We don't have any funding or resources or skills, and that hasn't changed. And so they said, well, give us a long-term lease and we shall do something, and they did. Key thing here, and I think it was a first, was that the dock have to charge a concession fee, a rent or a lease, but for 10 years that had to be reinvested back in the facility. So things like water mains, some of the buildings that were bad foundations, that was all done. We still have two of the original founding trustees on our trust board. That happens to be John Duffy in his stubbies, cooking a barbecue. Still a lot to do, and kicked into it. So 2002 there was a major upgrade on the upper part of the camp. 2006, I'd started in 2005, so that was one of my first big projects. We did an upgrade to the lower part of the camp. When you are on an island with no roads, bridges or tunnels, it can become quite difficult to pour 1,400 square metres of concrete. Who wants to do that? I've got some pointers for you.
Don't do it.
That was good, it was fun, it was a big day. Yeah, anyway, so looking at the activities, this is how it used to be, often run by teachers and parents, no compliance, no testing, no safety. Sorry, it wasn't dangerous, but compared to today, it was very relaxed. So then, so that was actually, ironically, I took that photo, that was 1983 when I went to my Teachers College orientation camp there. By 2005, it was a proper high ropes course. However, the pine trees were 65 years old and they started to fall down. So that was another little job I did. We cut those down. All fully certified and everything else. Duck pond, thanks to the military, there was lots of broken glass and porcelain and rusty steel that used to pop up at inconvenient moments. So we did a bit of an upgrade on that. It's now fully lined, a whole lot better thing. Survivor Challenge, that's a kind of a confidence course kind of thing. Da-da-da, drum roll. A long association with Rotary clubs. Newmarket Rotary have been very active in supporting us, and they actually substantially assisted with the design and construction of that Survivor Challenge course. I cannot remember the year, but apparently New Zealand Rotary clubs got to decide on a high international significant project, and that was Motutapu, with a number of walkways and stuff were put in, and that interest continued. Right, just some happy photos. Seriously beautiful place. Looking out towards the sea, towards Te Rātingi. Another little view there. And that is sunset, and that is just lovely. And I do note in the speaker's notes, it does not say that I'm allowed to promote or whatever. One of the things that I've always done is, if you ask people for something for nothing, they might help you once. If you actually ask them for the best possible deal they can do, they're more likely to be there to help you another time. So, won't go too far with this, but if you have connections and contacts that might be able to help us, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much. I'd be welcome. Any questions?
Yes, questions, please.
Duncan, is the original homestead that building down on the water, down on the beach? Is that the?
No, that's at Home Bay. So the Reed Homestead is at Home Bay.
Oh, the homestead was over in Home Bay.
Yeah, and
Okay.
the Reed Graves are above it, up on a paddock called Monument.
Right.
And we're completely on the other side of the island.
Facing Turu.
Yeah.
So what was the building at the front there then? That's
Okay.
more like a house, isn't it?
So there's a building that we call the cottage. That was the
Yeah.
commanding officer's
Okay.
quarters. That is a 3-bedroom, a simple 3-bedroom house.
Yeah, yeah.
Next to is what we call the lodge. That was the officers' quarters. That has 34 beds, and then there's 4 dormitories going up the hill. Each of them with 45 beds in. The lower one was the women's dorm barracks, and then the 3 above were the males.
Right.
So they were separated by about 3 metres, and when alcoholic beverages became involved, that was a very short distance.
What's in the building? So those long buildings, are they just bunks all the way along? Or do they have
By
separate
and
rooms?
large,
Or?
yes. So 42 metres by 7 metres, basically goes bunk, 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 bunk. They do have partition walls in the middle, which is actually just mostly for bracing, but that does create some smaller rooms.
The fertile land on the island, is it farmed, like properly farmed for anything?
It was farmed by a commercial company called Motutapu Farms Limited. It was owned by a guy called Rick Braddock. He was a very competent and successful farmer, both a good operator, but also made quite a lot of money. I managed to get a copy of a farm report that said it was sort of between $700 and $1 million of clear profit came out of that island. And he's got a lovely house in Remuera. Unfortunately, Motutapu has been a test case for treaty settlements, and in 2018, Ngāi Tamaki took the Department of Conservation to the Supreme Court, contesting all sorts of things, including the farm concession, Fuller's permission to guide on Rangitoto, and believe it or not, the Restorations Trust's sort of right to do what they were doing. The findings of the normal court were dismissed, the High Court dismissed, but the Supreme Court upheld it and said that whilst the outcome of the concession allocations, so the farm was a concession lease, was unlikely to have changed, DOC did not go through due process and did not take regard for Section 4 of the Conservation Act, where they must give effect to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. It's the strongest wording in relation to treaty and consultation of any major New Zealand document. And so DOC got very, very scared, and what they did was they, all of the concessions were at least 5 years, they cancelled them. They said by this stage those concessions had already run for 1 year, they gave them a 1 year notice period, and then they ended. All of the parties, particularly Fuller's on the farm, had expended enormous amounts of money going through the concession application process, and he just threw the towel in. He found some land that wasn't complicated. Since then it's been operated by a branch of Ngāi Tamaki, and it's actually under a management agreement which was supposed to be for 2 years, and just seems to be dribbling on. And right at this moment, and somebody I was speaking to, so I can't remember who it was saying they went into Mullet Bay, and basically you can't get out of there because the grass is kaiku's this high. So you can draw your own conclusions as to how well it's being managed currently.
So do they have animals on, or are there still dry stock on there?
Yeah, when Rick was farming it, there was usually about 1,300 cattle and about 5,000 sheep. At the moment was 9, but 5 got eaten. 4 sheep, maybe 4 or 5 sheep, I can't remember. I missed the last part, I can't remember. And about 200 cattle, which apparently are owned by the Spencers on Waihepi.
Actually, it'd be quite a fire hazard that kaiku is high and just something.
Yeah, and the problem, of course, is the fire travels under the grass. So it dries right out. But yes, that I am very displeased about how that's being managed. And I think we'll be non-specific here, but when courts make these rulings and they actually kick someone out, they throw the baby out with the bathwater. So in the case of the farm, he was maintaining the roads, the fences, the water reticulation system. It's a big island to mow. He had animals that did it for him. The tracks are not fenced, so the animals maintained the tracks as well. So the few areas that you did have to sort of manually mow or weed whack was quite manageable. But now DOC have created this enormous cost and workload for themselves because Ngaitai is simply not doing it. There's so few animals, none of the tracks get eaten to the point where you can walk on them, and so they're having to mow them, which they're doing a reasonably poor job of. And the relevance to that, and that's linking the farm to the fire, is when you've got it eaten down, that's great. If the tracks were mowed, they actually become something of a fire break. At least it'll slow. I mean, as you're seeing in Christchurch at the moment, generally you don't try and fight the fire. You try and contain it so that it burns itself out. And the idea of even if it's just a walking track, is you can actually start wetting down on the non-fire side of it. So it'll burn, get to the track, lose a whole lot of its energy, and hopefully not leap across.
Is the pest eradication going on?
The island is entirely pest-free apart from us humans. And you were saying before about how nice it is hearing tuis and birds like that. We have a wee cabin surrounded by the hurikawas, and at any given moment I could probably see 5 bellbirds, 5 or 6 tui, probably a kiruru, perhaps a kakariki.
Bellbirds, unusual. Bellbirds are unusual around Auckland.
Extremely plentiful around us. They absolutely love the prairie trees and several of the other trees. So yeah.
They come from Turi.
Yeah. And there was, it's all sort of because of, it's not being actively expanded at the moment, but there's the 13k range, a 13k rule. So basically, if you've got safe pest-free habitat within a 13k distance, then birds will freely travel between them. And obviously, once the population gets to a certain size, they will look for more habitat, more food, places to nest, territories. And so, whilst there has been a lot of translocations to Motutapu, including Kiwi and Takahe, a lot of it has come just organically from the likes of Turi.
I noticed the on the cliff facing Mairehi, in the Mairehi Channel there, up on top of the cliff, all the trees died up there. Is that deliberate or?
Yes. One of the consultants that DOC employed felt that pine trees were public enemy number 1, and so a great deal of money was spent poisoning pine trees. There was 3 significant stands that they addressed. 2 of them they poisoned, and that's one of them. The other, there was that one, and the one by West Point were poisoned, and then there was some up in the middle of the island that they just actually cut down and just bulldozed off into the gully. They probably had approval from Heritage New Zealand to do that, probably. And look, wilding pines are a problem, and those ones in the positions they were, their seed would have scattered onto pasture. Ironically though, pasture that's actively grazed is very likely to have wilding pines established.
Oh, they are wilding pines, those.
No, those were planted. They would have been planted by the reeds or the grahams.
Yeah.
That was a visual for the edge of the cliff, really, wasn't it? The ones that
Yeah. And look, I don't know how good pine trees are at slowing erosion down, but yeah, when those things fall, they'll take a bit of a cliff with them. And there's big rows of Norfolk pines as well, heading up the valley behind Emu Point. There was another homestead at Emu Point, but I don't actually know much about it.
So Duncan, just as far as the camp is concerned, there is, you've just about come to the end of your 24 years lease, haven't you?
We have.
It's this year?
No, it was June last year.
Last year. I mean, that was, how many kids have you put through the camp in that period?
So in the time that I've been there, since 2005, I can hand on heart say it's greater than 150,000.
Right.
Records prior to that aren't as good, but yeah, I mean, over that 24 years, it's got to be close to 200,000.
And I mean, this is a facility that the MOET looks after, maintains, and provides this fantastic opportunity for kids to go and experience this outdoor camp, which a lot of kids just haven't had that experience in life because there aren't that sort of facility that they can go down the road and do. How successful have you been in terms of getting the lease extended?
We have utterly failed. And so, because of the Supreme Court ruling in 2018, but more importantly, how DOC has treated that or interpreted that, every senior DOC person following that outcome got caned. They got hauled into the headmaster's office and they got whipped mercilessly, and they got told that we will never be in this position ever again. Do you hear me? We will never ever be in this position again. Do you hear me? As if I haven't made myself clear, we will never be in this position again. So if you get a government employee with a directive like that, at the slightest push, you're just going to go whatever you like to do, and that's exactly what's been happening. So we have filed a concession application, and on my insistence, it was 100% compliant. Like it talks about your ability to run the facility and all your compliance. However, that's basically in a mothball situation. It did trigger clause 17ZZA of the Conservation Act, which basically says that if an incumbent concession holder applies for the next concession, they can be granted a continuance until some subsequent decision is made. That's the position that we are in today. We're in the final stages, however, of agreeing an MOU with Ngāi Taiki Tamaki, where basically they will have the concession and the mana of the concession, because that is what they want, and we will do all the work.
Do you foresee there being good support out of the current government in order to
Yeah, it's a really good question. So it's been quite well concealed, but the current Minister of Conservation, Tam Potaka, was actually the CEO of Ngāi Taiki Tamaki for 18 months to 2 years. And it's interesting because he was asked to declare his sort of interests and stuff, and that one was just left off the list. So I tucked that in my back pocket. He was extremely critical of DOC when he was in the Ngāi Tai seat, and I have saved all of his emails, and I'll be seeing him at the first possible opportunity.
Maybe further up the food, maybe further up the food chain.
Further up in the Minister of Conservation. Yeah.
Party
Yeah.
leaders.
Yeah. So I don't want to turn this into a political thing, but the seat that I sit in co-governance has not worked for us at all well. And it's not for us; it's for 150,000 young people.
Yeah.
And I guess
And it's a charitable trust. I mean, it's not an entity that's doing it to make a profit for themselves. It's there to provide the service. I mean, it's
something we're very proud of, particularly myself, because I am a-religious. I do not consider myself to be an atheist. I am a-religious. We have Muslim groups, we have Sikh groups, we have Christian groups, we have non-denominational groups, we have gay, lesbian, bi, trans, you name it. I don't care. The word is respect. If they will respect the facility and they can get some benefit from it, the door is open. And I'm not saying there's been any inklings as to that Ngāi Tai might try and limit the catchment, but it would be the day after I leave.
Would they run the place themselves?
I mean, this
That's what I mean,
is
they just let it go.
this is the ridiculous thing, isn't it?
You always want to close the door because this is getting right out of thin ice. They can't run a farm.
No.
They can't run a nursery.
No.
And at the moment they're surviving off $1 million that they were given through the Jobs for Nature Fund. And when that dries up, and so the change in political leadership, that will dry up. Amazingly, they were given $1 million. They actually under-delivered. So they've only drawn down just over half of it, but even on that basis, they've under-delivered. So the most optimistic account is they've done 30% of what they should have done, and they've taken over 50% of the money. But they've just been given a 2-year extension to achieve that. So they'll keep frittering that away for another couple
Very frustrating.
And one of the things, this is, I don't think that might be saying, so Auckland Time Foundation are one of our supporters, Halfmoon at Bay Marina. I personally don't like the pub charities kind of fundraising. I consider that to be blood money. That's taken from the poor to give to the poor. And so I've, thanks to Harvey and some other trustees, we've got a really good relationship with AMF. They pay our insurance bill. We wanted to extend the lodge, some extent it. We wanted to modify. The deck is actually like non-compliant and there's a risk of people falling and stuff. And so to fix that, we were going to put some bleachers in, expand the deck area, just really make it a bit nicer. At the time, the figure was $130,000. And we had, I think, was it 2 years left to go on our lease, on a concession. And, I got talking to them, they absolutely loved it. And the question was saying, if we put $130,000 into this place now, can you assure me that it'll be open to be used by, every young New Zealander, for the foreseeable future? And I said, sorry, I can't promise you that. And they said, well, we'll keep that money tucked away, and when you can give us that assurance, we might reconsider that. A nice conversation, not angry at all, but their support is about every kid, and for a long time.
Duncan, thank you so much this morning for coming along and giving us such a comprehensive view of the island we all know so well. But boy, I've learned a lot there. I've been out planting out there and motored around it and all sorts of things. Beautiful place, but to learn so much more. And the effort put in over such a long period of time is tremendous. I hope you can iron out these issues with the lease and carry on with the support.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things I absolutely love, and I'm quite into wearing, this is just good promotion. I'll go into plumbing stores and all sorts, and the guy might get it. Oh wow, I went there. That was, have you still got the flying fox? It totally melts your heart. I was on a barge one day just bludging a lift, and there was a parent standing there and sort of looking out. And I said, oh, how did you get roped into this? There you go. That's a sign from God.